grew up in northwest London. I'm the eldest of my mum's children. My mum had 3 daughters. My dad had 6 children. So I'm the second of my dad's children, second of 6, but the eldest of my mum's. I was always aware that I had a much more complex sort of family genogram than my peers. I was really fortunate to have been selected on an assisted place for a private school in North London, Hertfordshire. It was Hertfordshire, Haberdashers Asks.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
Yeah, so I got an assisted places in the 90s. In the 90s. And I did really well. And I went to Oxford, and I was sort of the first. My mum was the first person in our family to get a university degree, but I was.
What was her degree in?
She did social policy. But then, yeah, I was the first one to go to Oxbridge in the family, and absolutely loved it. It was just like, it was idyllic actually studying in Oxford, I have to say. I constantly felt inspired, and I felt like I could do anything. Started off with philosophy and psychology, and then I dropped philosophy because I really wanted to. I knew I wanted to be a clinical psychologist by that point. So I dropped philosophy. What more would you like? So I suppose growing up, I was always my family, no stranger to sort of mental health problems, and we've had I've taken on a caring role from a very young age, and I think that's probably what I was always the one that people would go to with their problems, even from a very young age. So I think that's what the kind of factors that led me to want to be a clinical psychologist. And particularly the prevalence of schizophrenia in the Black community, in the Black male community, was something that I did. A lot of my kind of early research was on psychosis, even at university. My undergrad was really, really interested in CBT for psychosis. And when I was studying it academically, I thought, like, I was just so inspired. I thought, great, this is going to work. This is going to be fantastic. I'm going to go out there, be a clinical psychologist, and treat all these people who hear voices. And that's not quite what happened when I trained. It's not quite as magic. The therapies aren't quite as magic as you think they're going to be when you're studying them academically. So reality hit, and I realized I didn't want to work in psychosis, but I thought it was really important to have like a range of different therapies and to innovate and to do things that were unique and client-led and tailored to the client. So I think that's why I really wanted to kind of later on edit this book, because it was about innovating in therapy and kind of breaking boundaries with therapy for the childhood brain injury population.
Just go back a bit. It's quite interesting what you're saying here, because your experience of personal issues leading you to want to be a psychologist is what a lot of people say. It's not, oh, I read Freud and suddenly realized this was true. It was either I or a member of my family suffered something when I was younger, and the other thing is that your experience of going to an assisted place. I won a scholarship to a public school from a family that had never been to university at all. My father was a very clever man, but at that stage, if you did well in your A levels, as were, the local education authority would pay for your place, and that's what happened with me. So that was
fantastic.
There's some similar sorts of things. You mentioned in your CV, in your bio, you say you're very interested in men's mental health. Is that what that comes from? Is that from the schizophrenia thing, or is it a more general thing?
I think it is more general. I've just actually, I will answer your question. I've just done an interview with a BBC presenter actually on men's mental health, and it was about how employers can support men with their mental health better. I suppose, yes, I have been aware. There have been male suicides in my family, and just very much was aware that men wouldn't necessarily seek help, and they were much more resistant to seeking help. And I'm really kind of passionate about breaking barriers for
Because
men's,
there is now a group. There is now a group looking at men's mental health in the BPS, and I've actually talked to them about it, and they've actually been criticised hugely by
why?
because it's seen as diminishing the psychology of women's division. There's some people who have got and yes, exactly, my feeling exactly.
No.
And they argued that one of the issues was that men just simply don't admit it, and I presume that's as true, if not more true, of black men than it is of
Of course, because it's kind of like you've got the double stigma. It's like when I was at university, at Oxford, in my undergrad, it was that double out group. I studied social psychology, the social psychology of intergroup conflict, and just that, it's bad enough being black then, and then to say you've got mental problem on top, and then anything else, gay as well. The more kind of layers of otherness there are, the more likely there is to be conflict, discrimination, prejudice, hatred. And so it's really hard to be black and have a mental health problem.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And what that actually connotates, does it connotate more perceptions of violence, more perceptions of anger, of madness, that kind of line between mental health and what was classically called mad. And so it's hard. It's more stigmatizing if you're from the black community, definitely, or minoritized community.
Yeah, very interesting. So when you were at school, did you already know that you were interested in psychology, or did you get interested, or were there other options for you?
So yeah, when I think it was
I
kind
wanted
of
to be a Beatle. I wanted to be George Harrison. That's basically, and I've always wanted to be George Harrison, but that's fine.
I love that, and I hope you did something musical as well.
I write lyrics for a band, and I write lyrics for choirs as well. So
that's amazing, and I think that's the thing. We should be inspired by
yeah.
whoever we're inspired by, and actually see what we can explore
Anyway,
that.
yeah,
And
so much me.
so so obviously kind of age 6 wanted to be a ballerina. That's kind of how it all starts off, doesn't it, when you're very girly girl. By about 14, I wanted to be 10 to 14, I wanted to be a writer. So it's quite good that dream come true of actually editing a book. And then by sort of, I would say between 14 to 17, I think it was counselor, and then was definitively more clinical psychology by the time I got to Oxford, I would say. But
Were
yeah.
you a clever kid? I know that's a very strange question, but it sounds as though you were. Were you?
Yeah, I think so. I always in primary school, I always kind of what's the word? When you kind of, not only was I head and shoulders above everyone, I was always taller, but I always kind of was always top of the class. And actually they put me ahead a year. Back in the 80s, they would put you up a year, wouldn't they?
Yeah, they would. Yeah.
So I was always a year younger than everyone in my class until I got to at secondary school, because it was a selective school. Then it felt as though I was automatically assumed from my background that I wouldn't be as clever as everyone else. And so I was systematically kind of, the perception was that I was average, but then when I do my exams, I would always be like A star, A. All my GCSEs and A levels were A star, A. Some of my GCSEs were like 100%, 98%. But for years I felt not good enough, or not kind of, that I was at most average. And I think that was probably the kind of system, and the fact that I was on an assisted place, I would say.
Yeah, but you've identified already 2 ways in which projection from other people onto somebody of a black background, Jamaica. You taught yourself as having an Anglo-Jamaican background.
Yeah.
Men are often, if they're suffering from things, are often seen as violent or mad or something like that, and you were seen as less intelligent than you obviously were. But presumably you must have experienced other things in your route through a selective secondary school. I'm assuming that those experiences have informed what you've become, but I might be wrong. It's a genuine question.
What other things? I
Any
suppose like
other
being, I
sorts of
think,
projections and discriminations and those sorts
yeah,
of things. Is that
one
true,
of
or is that, am I assuming something?
no, I think you're right. I think I was one of two black children in the whole school,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and then I would get comments like, "Oh, is that your sister?" Like, or is that your twin? It was even worse than that. It was, is that your twin? And she was a year below me, but it was, people would not have had black friends or black colleagues, and so they couldn't relate, and they would say silly things like that.
Yeah. And was that true at Oxford, or was Oxford you
Oh my gosh,
long terms?
Oxford was amazing. So in secondary school, it was, oh, your hair's different, and they'd want to feel your hair and pull your hair and things like that. And I found we were in a group who were still very, very friends, very close friends with 30 years later, a group of women who are from minority backgrounds predominantly. We ended up kind of finding us, we didn't even realize it was happening, but we just kind of gravitated towards each other.
Yeah.
But we're really close friends. But no, Oxford, it was a breath of fresh air, because I honestly felt like I could do anything and that there were no limits to it. Was a really uplifting and empowering experience. I didn't ever feel any discrimination or any stereotyping or telling me that I couldn't achieve. It was just the most idyllic place, really. I'd love to go back and teach there.
I lived in Henley-on-Thames for a while, and which is just down the road from Oxford, and I used to pop in there fairly regularly and go to Brown's, the cafe in the market.
Oh yes, yeah.
Which I used to think was fun, and go to the bookshop, because
Just idyllic.
as you can see from behind me, I'm an inveterate book buyer. So
Oh, fantastic. I'm so glad that you are. And everything's on screens now. And apparently, um, reading on a screen is qualitatively different. Like
yeah,
we
it
we
is.
we receive the information differently. And I
Yeah.
want to do some research into that, because I think it's fascinating.
It is. I use a Kindle when I go abroad, but to some extent, but I take books with me as well. And for instance, I've just been to Greece, and I've got fascinated by the Persians and the history of Iran, because in fact, in an odd sort of way, Western culture has written them out and said it was the Greeks that were the goodies and the Persians who were the baddest. And of course, that's completely
Oh.
untrue. Yeah. So I'm really thinking, I've got all these books piled up to read. When you started studying psychology in earnest, what surprised you about it? What gripped you, and what disappointed you, or did you find
Oh,
difficult?
that's a brilliant question. And I'm just so happy you've asked that, because it's been so long. And back in the day, there's no way you could talk to your tutors about that. So I was really disappointed. The neuroscience really underwhelmed me, because we studied action potentials for what felt like about a year,
Yeah.
how cells conduct messages between one another, brain cells, and the neuro physiology was, it just, I was there wanting to know how to, clinically treat postnatal depression, schizophrenia, bipolar. And there we were talking about like nerve endings and chemical messengers. And I was losing the will to live with the neurophysiology. I don't mind neuro, obviously our book is on acquired brain injury.
Yeah.
I like the brain in a kind of what the function and structure and the purpose of kind of the cellular activity of the brain, and what it manifests, how it manifests in daily life, and how we can like rehabilitate. But for me, it's always got to be clinical, like a clinical reason for it. And I really didn't like that. It was, yeah, mind numbing.
Other things.
What, that I didn't like on the curriculum?
You did like. You've actually already mentioned one thing that you did like, which was you obviously got interest in social psychology at some stage, actually, which is very interesting, I think, because social psychology disappeared in the late 60s because of
Yeah, the
nonsense.
experiments were just really evil and unethical, weren't they?
Yeah, I know, and also it became politicized in a rather ridiculous way, and it's like I suppose I'm a kid of the 60s. I used to have hair that I could actually sit on and sort of.
That's
So,
amazing.
down there are lots of 60s albums, and over there are lots of 60s books. But it became a bit of a parody. It disappeared, and now it's coming back, thank God, because a lot of psychology is internal, and social psychology is beginning to talk about group
Oh,
effects
I think
and the
so.
space between people and
Oh,
those
yeah.
sorts of things.
And I think that's what's really hard. So what I loved about my kind of 20-something brain in psychology, like the way I saw the world was in the CBT framework, that thoughts, feelings, and behaviors would be the be all and end all of how we would get through things, how we would get through trauma and stress and pain management. I thought it was the answer to everything.
Yeah.
Then it was very much learning when I was clinically applying models like CBT, that there was all that space in between, and the relational and the systemic and the contextual factors, the soup that we're all in, whichever kind of climate, culture, the transgenerational patterns. There's so much more beyond what we think, because even how we think is transmitted through so many different channels and processes. So I think it's been my work and my actual outcomes with my clients it's a lot better than when I was pure CBT trained, because I'm able to draw on so many different models and, like you say, think about things beyond the consulting room and, yeah, systemic and cultural and all sorts of other factors.
It's interesting that in educational psychology, they're beginning to realize that. When I started in publishing, I used to publish some of the big tests that we used in schools. And that's what educational psychologists did: trot in, open a big briefcase,
Yes.
test, walk out again, write a report. This kid is autistic, this kid is on the spectrum, dyslexic, particularly because they're from a middle-class background and therefore they played the system. And where's the next kid? And now, of course, they're saying, actually, what we do is we start out by talking to the family, looking at the school context, looking at
Exactly.
that. And maybe at the end, we do an assessment to find out and so we get and that is a huge change
Massive shift.
Yeah, an educational psychologist, and I think community psychology has made some changes in clinical
Definitely.
psychology as well.
Yeah,
in some ways. But so those are the things that those sort of things. Did you get on with things like the statistics and stuff like
that because that's the way my mind was in my 20s. It was like there's a right and the wrong, and there's a number, and that's going to solve everything because there's going to be a cutoff and there's going to be a bell curve, and that's going to be statistically significant, and then we proved it. It was all very I loved numbers because it was like the way to get the proof to the theory that we all believed in. And I always loved stats and modeling, like theories, and so one of my papers is actually on hearing voices. It's looking at the role of insecure attachment.
Right, okay.
And beliefs about voices and others, and how that model, the attachment, beliefs about yourself and others, it explained nearly 40% of the distress from hearing voices. So that was in my doctorate though that I did that, but it just shows how much I love numbers really. And we had I think it was almost 200 people that had heard voices in that study.
Okay, that's interesting. Attachment theory is just fascinating. I actually gave wrote a book for somebody on it in business. It's being used in recruitment in a number of businesses.
Interesting.
It's a guy. In fact, he was in touch with a Dutch psychologist, and he had 300,000 words.
Oh, I lost you for a second.
Yeah.
Oh, I can hear you now. Are you back in the room?
Yeah, you've frozen for a second.
Okay. Hopefully we'll be okay.
Actually. I think the internet was being interrupted.
Oh, okay. Yeah, mine
Okay,
still
so
seems to be okay, but let me know if you need more of the Wi-Fi booster because it's not connected to the booster, but I've got a full signal on the normal
yeah,
internet.
okay, good, okay, we'll see. Um, so you do your university, your degree. You've come through. You started out wanting to be a clinical psychologist. You've moved from maybe being totally CBT based or model based,
Yeah.
and to an awareness that it's wide. Now, what happens next? What happens to you next?
Awareness that there's other factors, external factors.
Yeah, I mean, after you left university, did you go straight on and do a doctorate? Did you?
Oh, so what I did, so we all knew we needed to get clinical experience or research experience to get onto the clinical psychology doctorate. So my bread and butter, the thing that the area of psychology I absolutely loved doing, could do with my eyes closed, was older adult mental health. I know that seems that this come out of the blue, but I don't know, maybe it's because of my attachment to my own grandparents. I absolutely loved my grandparents and they would look after me quite a bit. And I don't know, maybe it's something to do with that. But my first roles were in the older adult mental health team. I was in Camden in London. And then I also worked at UCL and I was I was a research administrator for or research assistant, I think, for a peer support study looking at women's cancer, peer support in women's cancer at UCL. This was probably 2007-8. So I did those two jobs alongside each other for a couple of years. And then, and then I did a year of the IAPT training, the CBT diploma, where I was a low intensity CBT therapist and a lot of guided self-help there and kind of brief interventions. And that horrible thing called computerized CBT came out as well.
Yes.
That was awful. That was probably before apps, got as brilliant as they've come. That was probably the worst. But probably they had to start somewhere, but that was not a good intervention. So worked in the NHS, and then it was after I finished the year in IAPT is when I went to Surrey University and did my doctorate there.
Oh right, okay. You're at that's at Guildford, isn't it?
Yeah, that was in Guildford.
I know somebody, Almouth McDowell, who worked there for some years actually. But anyway,
I don't know them.
Yeah. So you did your doctorate in Surrey.
Yeah.
And worked alongside it.
Yeah, so it's pretty amazing really, the experience of training, because you've got 2 days of lectures and then 2.5 days of placement and then half a day for study. And you're doing your assignments and your major research project and your service related audit. You're doing all of that over the 3 years alongside your NHS placement and your 2 days of lectures per week. And so it's like a really enriching course because you're constantly learning and then constantly putting it into practice on your placement. But then you've also got your assignments as well, where you're kind of getting the academics. So the academic, the clinical, and the research kind of go hand in hand. And it was a really amazing training. I think Surrey's one of the top 10 universities as well, isn't it?
It's really, really good, I think. I did a guest lecture down there about something on the occupational psychology course.
Really fantastic.
One thing I should admit, by the way, is I'm not a psychologist. I just got involved with it.
You're a vicarious psychologist.
Yeah, I'm because I'm a coach, but actually my degree is in art history, and my postgraduate degree is in English and art history. So it's
fantastic.
But it's very funny actually, because I get to do all these things and I keep on saying, I'm even the European Federation.
We've adopted you as one now.
Well, yeah, I advise the European Federation of Psychological Associations. It's really, really good.
As you say, as long as you're honest about your credentials, it's absolutely fine.
Yeah. So you do that, and and in a sense, you're your education up to then, it sounds like, has been starting from one point and then widening and widening and widening what you could potentially do, getting more experiences,
Yeah.
challenging what you thought.
Oh, so
Well,
hard. But
yeah.
the areas that I'd never worked in, so um, older adults and adults were familiar, but then when I had to work with children and then people with learning disabilities, those were completely new areas for me. And then I also did a specialist placement in brain injury because I wanted to learn more about brain injury. Um,
Yeah.
and that the lectures I was sort of glossing over in the lectures on psychometric and neuropsychological testing. I didn't understand it at all. So I thought, let me just do a placement and work out what this all is. So I'm really glad I did that. But yeah, I get more and more kind of a really, really broad training, which I loved. It really, really challenged me, really stretched my capabilities. Whereas if I had just worked with adults, which is what would have been the easiest thing to do, or older adults, I would never have written this book
No,
on
we'll
child
come
of
to
brain injury because it's a
it's no,
completely
no,
different area, not older adults, not psychosis, not CBT. It's yeah.
many years ago. I used to work for a sister company of Routledge's, actually, but that's
Great.
by the way.
Well, can't was it Karnak or
No, it wasn't. It was it was Routledge at one stage was owned by the Thompson Corporation, who also owned the Times newspapers and things like that.
oh, okay,
And they were
great.
based in Canada, and we were part of another. There were all sorts of books. There were all sorts of publishers there. But
Yeah.
one subject before that, I worked for another company that published cookery books,
Hmm.
and one of my big books was the Victoria Principal Beauty book.
Okay.
So I had that experience of working with that sort of publishing, and then moved on to other things as well. So you're
Great.
doing this. You're doing this postgraduate degree. You're doing your doctorate. You're getting lots of experience there. You finish your, presumably it's a 3-year course. Do you get your PhD straight away, or do you do? And then
I actually had to repeat my child placement, but it was a really good thing that happened. As I said, it was very, very new because as we talked about it, I hadn't really been seeing people or families in context before
yeah,
until now. So there you go see children, very, very busy, CAM service with like a year-long waiting list, very, very high-risk children, completely out of my depth. Just maybe in the politics of the whole team and how busy and pressured CAMS was. And then because the pace was just completely different to the other teams I'd worked in. But the good news for having to redo the child placement, it was a lot, like massive source of shame at the time. But what it meant was I actually met the little boy of 12 that inspired the book that I then went on to co-edit. It was my idea. It was inspired by him. So if I hadn't repeated the placement in 2012, I would never have met him, and probably there wouldn't be this book, almost certainly, because he was one of the first people with acquired brain injury that I'd worked with, and the first child.
and did you come up with the book idea and start working on it straight away? I've read a little bit about some of the
Yeah,
things that you've written about within the book, but it seems a very brave thing to do. Even from your CV, I thought, well, where does that come from?
I
Given those
know. I
beforehand.
was I was sorry, I'm just checking on my exit. Yeah, I was I get really compelled and passionate about an idea. What it is, it's normally that I see that there's a gap in the literature, and that gap drives me mad, and I feel like I have to do something about it. And
Yeah.
what I could see was there weren't any books on psychological therapy for pediatric acquired brain injury. And there certainly weren't any books talking you through how you work with the children, families, siblings, the team, the system around the child. If a child is, has lost their ability to speak, has emotional dysregulation, PTSD, disorders of consciousness. We talk about how you work with the child with a disorder of consciousness. So children and young people who offend or go on to offend in later life, who've sustained a brain injury, what the origins and causes are, but yeah, it was, I suppose I'm a very spiritual person when it comes to thinking of missions. I'm one of those people, I have to say, that something just compelled me, even though wasn't even qualified. Well, I think when I come up with the idea, I wasn't qualified. I was on my um last placement in CAMS, and it was just going to be a paper that I would try and his case study. I was going to try and publish it in the Journal of Narrative Therapy, or Dulwich, the Dulwich Centre. And the Dulwich Centre rejected it and basically said, look, this is not narrative therapy, because what we were doing was we were integrating a bit of rehab, a bit of CBT, a bit of narrative storytelling, a bit of, it was a mishmash of different approaches. So they rejected it. But then something still, I don't know what, I just knew, because the work had gone so well, because I'd adapted this narrative therapy for this young boy and he'd done so well. We're talking about within the space of 3 months, just having fortnightly sessions at school with the teaching assistant. He went from hopelessness and suicidal ideation, PTSD, not being able to walk without a wheelchair, all these, a whole host of physiological issues that resulted from the brain injury, because he had a hypothalamic pituitary brain injury, which had affected all the kind of regulation of his body, the hormones, his ability to regulate his urine output. Mm-hmm. So he needed assistance with the toilet, all sorts of assistance. And then within 3 months, he didn't need that. He wasn't using a wheelchair. He had started going to a mainstream school again, part-time. He was going to toilet independently. He reported no depression, no PTSD. And because it was such a transformative experience, if that's the right word, I knew I had to write about it. And I knew there was a gap in the literature. And I thought, if I just find everyone who's got more experience in this than me, then we're going to write a really amazing book. Because if I can find, people at Great Ormond Street, people at Tadworth Hospital, we had someone at Harley Street who, that was the icing on the cake. And one of the counselling psychologists who was involved in the first draft, she hired a room at Harley Street for us to have our meetings. So I automatically got all these credentials.
But you're very brave. That's quite a brave thing to do, because you were walking into a new area, but in your professional area, and just going out to people and saying, "It sounds like would you try a book with me?" And that's quite a brave thing.
What did you say? Sorry, I was walking.
Would you like to do a book with me? It's sort of quite a brave thing to do.
It's a complete madness, and I would never do it again, because I didn't know what I was taking on. I didn't know what I didn't know. And it's pretty much like, I feel like I should be given an honorary PhD for doing this book, because it was just, a phenomenal amount of work over 4 years. And obviously, anyway, you were going to say something.
I was going to say that your instinct, you said something quite interesting. You said, and you had to write about it. So one of your instincts is, if it's important, you have to write about it. Is that right? That's what comes across.
Yeah. I feel like it's really powerful. It's quite, they've done studies on it, haven't they? Pennebaker, on expressive writing, and there's something about it, for me at least, about actually getting the word out there and actually having a purpose and a story to tell and making differences in people's lives. And what was amazing to see was, even fairly recently, the book had enabled clients undergoing medical legal cases, their parents and the children were more likely to access funding. So because of the book, so the parents are more likely to get their own therapy as well. And that's the feedback I got from parents, that before your book, we weren't eligible. It was all about the child. And now we have a framework where we can actually advocate for our needs and what we need, and how that's going to help the child, because the evidence is that you work with the parents, you're going to help the child in their rehabilitation and with their mental health. So I knew that it had profound work to do. And so me being scared, I suppose I can just suppress that. because I know there's a greater good for
You
it.
also said something. You said you're a spiritual person. Does that mean is that expressed in religion, or is it a wider thing? I'm interested in it.
Yeah, so I suppose I'm not outwardly like I don't really tell many people that I'm Christian. It's not, and there's nothing to be ashamed of. It's more that I don't want anyone who isn't religious, because I've had a lot of like atheist friends from different faiths. It's not something that I don't preach it, if that makes
No,
sense. It's not, it's so
I'm
personal.
exactly the same. Interestingly enough, this is underneath my.
Oh,
This is
amazing.
your face is appearing above that at the moment.
Amazing.
I go on.
I do believe, yeah, I do
Yeah.
believe that
You're holding your. Yes, there you are.
no, it's a heart.
Oh, okay. I go on retreat occasionally to a monastery and have a
Oh,
silent retreat, which is
fantastic.
really phenomenal. It's a very interesting thing to do. But the reason I raise that is that when we talk about diversity and
Yeah.
your organisation, one of the mismatches I find is that a lot of clinical psychologists actually are basically Dawkins followers, anti-religious, and a lot of
Mm,
clients, particularly from smaller communities, see religion as something critically important, and I see that
essential. Yeah.
as a very, very strong mismatch. Particularly, I've talked to a couple of African psychologists about collective therapy and the importance of community and
Oh,
spiritual
absolutely.
belief, and how Western psychology could learn quite a lot from that. And I believe that. So let's talk a little bit about what happens to you. You've done your PhD, you presumably do some work. How does your organization develop? How does it come about? Where does it come from? And
So I mean, again, if I didn't believe in the spiritual purpose to my life, I would have really given up many years ago now,
yeah,
because when in 2019, I was diagnosed with the rare kidney condition.
yeah.
So I had two
I saw
children
that
at the
you had some
time.
sort of that you there's something on a website about having coping with a long-term conditioning and three kids. It's a bit of a perfect storm,
Yeah,
really.
and no one wants to talk. I feel like no one was talking about it. I talk about it in forums, like how are people managing? There were days where I couldn't get out of bed, and I felt so much mother's guilt
Yeah,
anyway. You feel maternal guilt for all sorts of reasons. And there'd be days where I couldn't take him to the park. I couldn't get out of bed. I could barely look after myself. And I suppose so. In 2018, I had two children. I had probably, yeah, a 1 year old and a 5 year old. And I decided to leave the NHS. Not, but it was really difficult. I mean, I was in tears over it because I never wanted to leave the NHS. I was in the NHS for 12 years at that point. And it was just something about juggling motherhood and work that meant, I just couldn't do the school runs. I was always late and always have to leave early. And um, I didn't actually know fully that my health was declining, but obviously there must be something internally going on where I just
yeah.
couldn't manage. So I left the NHS in I think it was 2019. Yeah, January 2019. And I'd been working privately for about a year, just seeing a few clients a week. And when I fell really ill in 2019, um, I needed somewhere to pass on my referrals, and that's how my practice started. So it
Right.
really started out kind of like, yeah, they say necessity is the mother of invention, don't they? So I I had all these inquiries coming in, and I wasn't well enough to see any of the clients. I thought I'd never work again. Was diagnosed with a rare kidney condition, and that's how my practice started, really, just passing on referrals to other psychologists. And I always thought it was really important to, what I missed in the NHS was that I worked with older people only, and I worked in dementia services, but I missed working with younger people and adults, and I really wanted to develop those skills. And so while I was writing the book, I got more experience in like pediatric psychology as well. And that's where lifespan psychology was born, just the idea that we're on this journey of life, and it doesn't matter what age we are, but at some point we probably need some support with our mental health. And the diverse practice is that we're an international team where some of us are kind of overseas, and we're from all walks of life, all backgrounds, literally Tahiti, Hong Kong, Jamaica, West Africa, Ireland, just everywhere. And just the theme of my website is kind of global, you know, the world. And I think for me that's really important to see psychology in the context of the world, and that we are, and diversity, and just not that there's one way or one way of thinking or being that's correct, and we need to pass on our CBT Western thinking, whether it might be, onto a particular person, that there are different ways of thinking, being, living, feeling, interpreting the world. So maybe some of my undergraduate philosophy is coming back there. Some of my Descartes and other, but yeah, kind of a philosophical approach to,
yeah,
and more of a critical approach to what are the tools we're using, and are they effective? Is the client happy? Is the client benefiting? Are they progressing? So a lot of feedback and outcome measures, which I know are problematic in themselves, using outcome measures sometimes, but yeah, just trying to diversify and tailor therapy a lot more than even we've been trained to be honest.
And at some stage it must have moved from, if you like, God, I've got to refer these people on, to having an actual vision for what you were doing. It must have coalesced at some stage. And was that just that dawned on you gradually that that's what you wanted to do?
Yeah, I think, like I said, I was extremely down. I didn't know actually at the book launch I was pregnant with my third child.
Yeah.
But what was amazing about that, and in one of my articles I described this, is that when I was pregnant with her, I was getting slightly better every day,
Right.
and my kidney function stabilized. So, and there's these studies that show that the baby stem cells can kind of heal the pregnant mum. And I mean, I like to believe that things like that do happen, and you know that could be part of our story. But I felt a lot better since having my third, in COVID. COVID pandemic baby. Not an easy cocktail of things to manage.
Talk about the diversity. You interpret diversity very widely. It sounds like it's not just ethnicity. It's gender preference. It's presumably sexual preference. It's religious and other philosophical beliefs. It's all. I get the impression that, and looking at the pictures, which is all I can really do on your website, it looks as though you have an extraordinarily diverse on all dimensions team that you work with.
I think this is so profoundly important to me. You know, it's intersectionality, and so I don't think anyone should ever feel marginalized, and I would never turn away anybody, even if they were from so-called dominant background or more prevalent background. I mean, I think that we're on intersectionality is such a broad kaleidoscope of things.
Yes.
That I wouldn't want to exclude anyone, and I wouldn't want to be seen as an all the Black women's therapy organization, or Black people, marginalized people only. That doesn't sit right with me, because I just don't. I mean, if you look at my genealogy anyway, yeah, I've also put that on my website. I think most of us are a lot more mixed than we even realize.
Yeah. Tell me about
it. We've got ancestry from probably, a minimum of 2 different places that could be completely different parts of the world. So yeah, I want to be truly inclusive, which means not excluding anyone for me. Yeah. That's really important.
I just had an operation on my hand because it was going like that.
Oh.
I was told that that's because I had a lot of Neanderthal genes inside me. So it's not just, so I'm not just human, I'm Neanderthal as well.
Oh gosh, it's fascinating, isn't it? Just
It
what
is.
they can
It's really
find out from our saliva.
in terms of this diversity. Do you think it's critically important from the client point of view that the therapist or the person working with them shares some of their identities, or does that not matter? Is that not an issue? Does it improve things? I mean, I'll go back again. I've talked with a lot of clinical psychologists, and particularly some psychologist trainers from the University of East London, and they were saying there's a real mismatch between quite young white middle-class girls who can afford to become clinical psychologists trying to go in and provide therapy to a Nigerian grandfather who's a born-again, who belongs to an evangelical church and things like that. And
Yeah,
it just
yeah.
doesn't matter. There's a mismatch. It doesn't work. Is that an issue? I know that's quite an extreme example.
Well, do you know, no, actually, I mean, this is what's brilliant about your example is that's exactly what we do. I mean, we
Yeah,
don't always have a match. If you want someone who's exactly the same sexuality, age,
yeah,
religion, race,
yeah, yeah,
you're normally looking at yourself in the mirror at that point because you just might as well do some self-help because you're not going to
yeah,
find anyone who's exactly. So we do still have the issue of not always having the perfect match in terms of people's, if they're very, very specific. But what I love about the way we work is that we're culturally informed and sensitive to intersectionality and diversity and actually open to having those conversations. So if I have a white middle class female working with an elderly Nigerian male with a specific background,
yeah,
it's what happens in supervision that can broaden the thinking, broaden the um, mentalization of the client and the thought process and understanding the client. And
right.
just, I think a lot can happen in supervision and your own personal therapy to, and also even from speaking to you, I can see how well read you are and how much you understand me, even though we're from like different backgrounds in some ways. I understand
Yeah, yeah,
you can learn, I believe you can learn and you can study and understand. And the client's testimony about their life, I think we have to buy into that and we have to believe what they're telling us. And
yes, we do. Yeah, yeah, that's a critical thing, I think.
I don't know if that answers your question, but I
It
don't
does.
necessarily think it has to be. I've certainly have therapy from people of different backgrounds,
Yeah,
and I've had some amazing interventions, and certainly like whether it be some of my close friends, a business coach, a mentor, they've
yeah,
not been the same background. They've been absolutely amazing. Um,
yeah,
I think it's just, I think the issue can come up if someone maybe denies your experience of racism.
yeah,
If someone says, "Oh, we don't believe that," or that didn't really happen, or maybe you're being paranoid.
mm,
um, I think denying your lived experience, whichever form that may come as, it could be your experience as a woman, it could be your experience as a child, your experience as a black person, a white person, whatever. If it's denied, I think that is the most painful part of therapy, regardless of race, I would say.
it's quite interesting. One thing I did in these interviews, and I've done them for a few years, was quietly I tried to find people who were involved in religious movements, and I found an Islamic therapist who had actually converted and moved to Saudi Arabia. I found somebody who lived in an Orthodox Jewish community in North London, and I talked to them about their ability to move outside the area they were in, and it was very, very interesting what they were talking. The
What
other
did they
thing,
say?
it was the interview with the lady in Saudi Arabia was a bit difficult because, in fact, psychology is very much frowned upon in certain in particularly male-oriented society. So she couldn't really admit what she was doing. She did all her therapy online, all of it, and it was almost entirely wives actually of men who had been abused.
Oh
And
gosh.
actually, in fact, interestingly, the Orthodox Jewish person said, "You just don't. These are very enclosed communities, and it's a secretive community.
Yeah, of
It's a
course.
very male-dominated community, and therefore sexually a very male-dominated community." And it was very interesting talking to them. But both also said that their religious beliefs, for instance, the Islamic therapist said, actually, in the hadith, in the Prophet's sayings, there are things which are a sort of Islamic psychology. And I find them very useful. It was very interesting. I managed to slip them past John without him realizing. I wanted to ask, the one other thing I wanted to ask, you've got these diverse people working together and presume they draw on different traditions. Is there a swapping of techniques and traditions? I mentioned my interest in African psychology, where it suddenly dawned on me, I hadn't realized this, just how individualized a lot of Western psychology is, whereas in Nigerian and Kenyan society, very much if somebody is acting in a certain way, it could be culturally normal because it's part of, but it could be that if that's happening, then the family gets round and they sometimes sing therapy in an sort of way.
They sing.
Yeah, they sing together and dance together.
Nice. Dance is supposed to be very therapeutic, isn't it?
It is. And in fact, your thing as a ballerina is something I've come across before. I've met a number of people who trained as ballerinas who have now become psychologists.
Oh, fantastic.
They see a link between body, physiology and psychology.
So important.
Within your group, is there a sort of developing swapping of different traditions of psychology, or
that would be amazing. I think because we grew in the pandemic. So we are a very virtual team ourselves at the moment. We do have clinics as well. But what that has meant is we have largely worked in silos. And so we're going to come together a lot more as of now. It was just the culture and the team at the time. They were kind of had their NHS role full time and just were seeing a few clients privately. And there wasn't that sort of team culture as such. But there's definitely more of that happening now, and more kind of team members working with the same client groups and sort of having peer supervision and talking and learning from each other. But we're going to definitely that's going to be a focus now that we've kind of passed COVID.
I get the impression I've got 12 pages of notes actually. So
my goodness! Wow.
I get the impression that you would prefer face-to-face sessions rather than online sessions in terms of your therapy. Is that right? Because you've obviously done online stuff.
So before COVID, you are 100% right about the pre-COVID, Esther. Yeah. I had one online session in my whole career before COVID, and me and the client hated it, and we ran back to face-to-face. But post-COVID, post-kidney diagnosis, post 3 children, I am online and seeing great outcomes online. And I've actually just written I wrote another blog piece about online therapy as well. As long as it's not glitchy, online therapy, it's just as effective, if not more so, than in person.
It certainly helps people who find difficulty traveling or haven't got the resources to travel or things like that. And the whole idea of psychology going to the person rather than the person coming to the psychology, I think, is critically important. And online does some good things in that. I'm very, very worried about some of the simplistic ways AI engineers are thinking that they can offer online therapy using machines at the moment.
Oh no, bit like the Beating the Blues, the CBT.
There's loads of stuff
therapy around that.
And in coaching, in my area, in the area I do with coaching, they're doing that. And I think you just don't understand what you're getting at actually here. You're getting it wrong. But I'm quite worried about that actually. But anyway, that's.
But the proof is always in the pudding with these technologies. If the client likes it, I don't know if the client. But also, we're becoming so isolated, aren't we, in some ways since COVID, and to not actually speak to a human.
And we're living in a very psychologized society. All young people I know. My niece lived in South Korea for a while, and I went over to visit her. Tracy and I went over to visit her. And on the underground in Seoul, you can actually buy Myers-Briggs type indicator from little machines on the underground. And every kid I knew over there knew their Myers-Briggs profile.
Wow.
And they would date on the basis of it, which is mad.
Oh my gosh, they date on the basis of it because they're just thinking, well, there's no point even trying if you're contraindicated that.
Yeah, as a 90 percentile introvert, I don't stand much of a chance, but that's bad.
Wow. Oh, I never thought that it would be. Yeah, We'll be slaves to AI. It's
So,
almost like those films are coming true sometimes, those 80s
well,
and
yeah,
90s
yeah,
films.
and the what's that Minority Report, the one where they predict crimes. That, you know, you could get the impression that a few people would like to be able to do that, but it's very, very dodgy. You know, it's very, very strange. Anyway, that's by the by. I've got, I think, enough together with looking in a bit more detail on your website and on your blogs.
All right. It was lovely to meet you.
Very nice to meet you.
I
Thank
look
you
forward
for
to hearing from you again. And
you
thank you for
will.
writing 12 to 13 pages on me.
You'll hear from me next week.
I'm really excited. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Have a
Okay,
good
you
week.
look after yourself.
You too. Bye.
Bye.